Prime Minister of the Kurdish Regional Government, Masrour Barzani. Welcome, Prime Minister. It's a great pleasure to have you here. I'm going to introduce the Prime Minister, who will say a few words, and then he and I will enter into a mini Manara dialogue for 10 minutes or so. Then I'll open the session to the floor. If you would like to ask a question, please just raise your hand and I will indicate. A microphone will be brought to you. And if you could kindly say your name and where you're from, that would be a great help. I'm afraid I don't know all of you by what I can see of your faces. So, Prime Minister, welcome.
Thank you.
Over the years at this dialogue, we have inevitably ended up talking at some point about Kurdistan and the KRG, because it has been on the international and regional security agenda for so long, for so many reasons. It is therefore a great pleasure to have you here today. There's a lot of talk about the direction in which the region is going, but the way in which the agenda is developing. We have new partnerships, alliances, alignments in the region. We have some de-escalation. We have signs of some recovery after COVID, so there's some grounds for optimism. And there's also, of course, caution about where things are going. Some of the big issues have not yet at all been solved. So I think my question to you to begin with, Prime Minister, is what does the regional security agenda look like from your position?
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and I thank all the ladies and gentlemen who are here. Of course, security is a big issue. We are all in this together because we're all part of this collective security that we all face. It's a big challenge, and from time to time we see that it changes. It changes in dynamic, and if I may just give you some general background on the security and the challenges that we faced in the past, and the reason why the security challenges have been there in the first place. As you know, relatively speaking, Kurdistan is a safe place. It has almost become an oasis of stability and security for many in the region. Many people have fled different parts of Iraq and the neighboring countries and have come to Kurdistan because of its security and because of its stability. But that wasn't without the cost. It was very difficult for us to maintain such a security in the region. As you know, that especially from 2014 onward, there was ISIS that were attacking all of Iraq and Syria, and they started to attack Kurdistan. So we had to fight ISIS on a line of 1,050 kilometers. Of course, we had help from our friends, the coalition forces led by the United States, who have been very essential in defeating ISIS militarily, and then eventually leading to the collapse of the caliphate, if you will. But that doesn't mean that ISIS threat is over. ISIS is still there, and it's still a problem, it's still a challenge. But that's not the only challenge. It's not the only security challenge that we're facing there. Over the years, from my experience, I've come to learn that terrorism itself is not, it doesn't form by itself, but it's the result or the consequence of a series of other events. In our case, from what I understand, that there are some root causes that lead to insurgency and terrorism. And these are poverty, injustice, and inequality. Wherever you see these things, there is a possibility that there would be some sort of terrorism. We saw ISIS, and before ISIS, Al-Qaeda and other organizations coming to Iraq because all of these reasons and causes were present. When people feel desperate, it's a human nature where you feel desperate and you don't feel secure enough, or you don't have enough to eat or feed your children, or secure future for your children, then you look at some alternatives. And unfortunately, sometimes these organizations come and present themselves as alternatives to the current systems. That's exactly what happened in Iraq. There was a lot of injustice, a lot of inequality, and a lot of poverty. And of course, with that it comes corruption and services. So that gives reasons to people who are poor, who probably don't even know the nature of these terrorist organizations, but because they want to retaliate against a dominant oppressive system, then they collaborate with these organizations, hoping for a better future, and sometimes it doesn't happen, like what we saw in Iraq. The city of Mosul, or the province of Mosul, after Anbar and then Tikrit, of course, they fell into the hands of ISIS when there were less than 1,000 fighters of ISIS attacking a province of more than 3 million. How did it fall? It wasn't because they were superior militarily. Iraqis had many armed forces there, military, federal police, but within a matter of less than 1 month, 12 Iraqi divisions collapsed, federal divisions, army and the federal police collapsed, and the weapon that provided to them by the coalition forces all fell into the hands of ISIS. And that doesn't mean that ISIS was superior, but because people collaborated with it. And the reason is because they felt that they were not treated well, that they did not have enough, let's say, services, or that they were complaining about corruption. And their plea didn't go anywhere. So they wanted to look at other things. Even today, when we see ISIS still exists, it's because that these root causes still exist. And if not today, tomorrow, or the day after, there will be another ISIS or something similar. So to fight terrorism, or to try to provide security, we have to look at beyond military operations. We need to collectively work together to provide a better living condition for people, to provide more services to people, to give them reason for a better future, to give them hope. And usually when people have better lives, they are less determined or less likely to resort to violence or to join terrorist organizations. Unfortunately, I don't see that effort to such an extent that can eliminate terrorism and bring a sustainable stability and security to the region. And that's a general perception that I have come to learn from first-hand experience. So my last word would be, we need to all look at how we can provide better services, have better economy, which eventually leads to better security, and that will lead to more political stability in the region. That's an example of ISIS, but that could be true for any other extremist organization anywhere in the world, in my view.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm sure many of us would agree on the root causes of terrorism. I wanted to pick up on your comment about your experience, because of course you were, for the best part of a decade or so, Chancellor of the KRG Security Council, so you have first-hand experience in these problems. One of the things that has changed recently is the new configurations of power in the Middle East. We've seen, to an extent, a stepping back by the US, but we've also seen a stepping in of many other actors in the region. How do you think that's going to play into the regional security agenda and the specific challenges that you face in Kurdistan?
ISIS or these terrorist organizations are not the only security challenges that we face. There are many. And some are just political agendas of some of the regional countries that try to push, and they do not necessarily serve or support the same ideas and values that people in different parts of the world want to have. So the collision of these ideas and agendas sometimes lead to some sort of confrontation and security challenges. I do believe that besides all of that, we are yet to face another major challenge, and that is the climate change, which is not only going to have direct effect on our lives, but it will have some indirect effects on the security. For instance, water. We've seen that in some areas the flow of rivers has been diverted and they've been blocked by building dams, or for whatever reason. That is going to create conditions, economic conditions for the locals, the people that are living in those areas, to not be able to live in those areas. And then eventually they try to look beyond the regions and migrate and go somewhere else, or become security threats to the very countries that feel that they are securing their own security and don't care about what goes beyond, what's happening beyond their borders. So these are some of the main areas that we need to look at from now on, and I think these are real. And at the beginning, maybe many years ago, I've heard that many people were talking about the threats or the risks of the climate change, but there is no longer a perception. It's happening. It's happening today. This is one of the biggest problems that I think we haven't really looked at it very seriously, or taken it very seriously. So all of these collective challenges that we're looking for is pushing countries to take certain measures to secure, let's say, their own national security. But one thing is missing there. There is no single national security. There is a collective national security. We all live together. And if you feel that you can be secure with your neighbor, you don't care about what's happening in your neighboring country, that is not going to bring you the stability and the security that you're seeking. Everybody has to feel comfortable. Everybody has to feel secure, so that there will be no risks to the security of any country or any nation.
And do you think that that calls for new sorts of collective structures in the region, or can we just do more with the ones that we've got?
I think there needs to be a review of what we call it, the collective security or the security structure. There needs to be a review. There needs to be more cooperation. There needs to be more support and aid from the ones that have and the ones that don't have.
Or would you see that as being an inclusive structure, including everyone, even the Iranians, or can we work without them?
Like I said, it would be best to have everybody on board, but if you leave anyone outside of the structure, then you obviously are missing something, and that could become problematic at some point. So it would be best to basically include everybody to come, let's say, around the table and look at all of these outstanding issues and see where would be a common understanding of solving the problems that are important to us.
And you touched, Prime Minister, on some of the challenges inside Kurdistan itself, and some of the ones that you're dealing with, particularly the social and the economic ones. Of course, after COVID, there was a collapse in oil revenues, the price itself was down. It's been a difficult time economically for Kurdistan. Elsewhere in the region, people are starting to feel a bit more optimistic. How are you feeling?
I am optimistic. I think we lived through some very tough times. We inherited, let's say, a government that was in debt by billions of dollars because of some of the problems that were accumulated over the years. Unpaid budgets by the federal government to Kurdistan region, the war on ISIS, hosting 2 million IDPs and refugees. These were all economic challenges that our government, previous cabinets faced. So when we took over, we were hoping that we can start a new phase with economic prosperity and development. Unfortunately, we were hit by COVID, so that really didn't help us at all. And with that, trade stopped, revenues declined, oil prices dropped. So it was a very difficult time for us, but we immediately tried to do reform. By reform, meaning tackling corruption and cutting the government expenditures and collecting revenues and turning to the private sector rather than running everything by the government. All of these things helped us to pass that difficult time. And in fact, today we see that there is a lot of economic development and movements and a lot of participation by private sectors. And of course, we have also adopted the new policy of public-private partnership. We have introduced new laws for investment that are more attractive to foreign investors. So we are in a good position today, but we are very ambitious. We want to be at a much higher level than where we are.
There's always a lot of talk here about the visions, the very public visions for the Gulf states, which are very ambitious indeed. Do you think that you've got a similar sort of vision? Do you see an entirely new kind of KRG-led Kurdistan?
Yes, of course. I mean, like I said, we are ambitious. We are not happy with where we are. We want to develop Kurdistan. We want to provide more for our people. We want to be more secure. We want to be more stable. And we want to not only do that for us, but to contribute to other parts of Iraq and the region. Kurdistan has huge potential. We have lots of natural resources that unfortunately until very recently hasn't been used for the good and sake of people. But in fact it was used to increase and confrontations between communities and nations. So with a good understanding, with better management, if we put all of the resources that are available into good use in developing our country and creating better living conditions, we think that we can contribute to the security and economic development of the entire region.
I wonder what your message would be to foreign partners and foreign investors.
To come to Kurdistan and invest.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm going to invite colleagues to come. I'm sure they have lots of questions. Gentleman here first.
Shall I wait for a microphone?
Yes, it's on its way.
Well, we've already taken your advice. Chris Bowers from Chevron. We are an investor in Kurdistan.
Yes.
And I want to thank you for your efforts in keeping the place secure in your previous job and now. And also in creating a happy and a prosperous, stable operating environment. I would like to also congratulate you on the elections, on the Iraqi elections. KDP did well, and we are in a sort of an interesting stage in terms of the government formation process. With negotiations haven't quite started yet, at least in public. But I was wondering if you had a succession of potential candidates for Prime Minister sitting in front of you, what would you be asking of them? What would be your demands? What would be the winning formula for the next Iraqi Prime Minister? I know it doesn't exactly work like that, but if you're in that situation, what would you want?
What would your interview question be?
Well, I would interview, but I'll share my views, obviously. Being on two sides, being on the security side, and also now being on the administrative side, I come to believe that in order to provide a better security, a better country, you need to improve the living conditions of people, provide more services. That's the key. That's the key to any question. So for any future Prime Minister of Iraq, the first thing he has to do is to tackle corruption. Now, even if that may look hard at the beginning to eliminate, at least stop it. Stop it, don't worry about what happened in the past. Stop it, and then you have plenty of time to review and if you want to manage the damages of the past. But stop it and then move forward. Have a forward vision of how you can better administer your country. Economy is the key. With better economy, it comes better security and better political stability. That would be my advice and my opinion to any Prime Minister.
Do you think, Prime Minister, that with the new government in Iraq, that there's an opportunity to solve some of the long-standing constitutional problems in Iraq? Or do you think they can be best kept off the agenda and just managed quietly?
Well, this is interesting because the Constitution was never implemented to say that there needs to be a change of the Constitution. Unfortunately, the authorities, different governments in Baghdad have been very selective in looking at constitutional articles. Whatever serves the centralization of the government was adopted, and then whatever was a part of the package of compromises on the constitution that would really take care of the needs of different communities of the country was avoided and ignored. That was the problem, and it still is the problem. So let's first focus on complete and full implementation of the constitution, and then if it didn't work, we have time to look at what needs to be amended.
Bari Alamuddin, a member of this organization, also a journalist. It's amazing how much you look like your dad. It's very interesting to watch you. Yes, you do. So if I may say, sir, when you talk about Mosul, you forgot to mention one reason why people supported ISIS. It's because they were slaughtered by Hashd al-Shabi before in many areas around Baghdad and other areas. Also a main terrorist organization, or organizations, I should say, in the form of Hashd al-Shabi. How do you plan to get rid of them?
Well, let me just make a correction. There was no Hashd al-Shabi at the time. There was no Hashd al-Shabi when Mosul fell. There were elements that eventually became Hashd al-Shabi. But there were other elements that were operating. But I did mention that injustice, inequality, and poverty. So there was a lot of injustice and lack of services and oppression and intimidation that happened all over the country. And that was the reason that pushed many of the locals to collaborate with ISIS. It was not specific to Mosul, but it was actually all over the place.
But how do you get rid of Hashd al-Shabi?
How do I?
Hashd al-Shabi in Iran.
And what's the question?
How do you get rid of them? What do you do?
Get rid of
It's like Lebanon, a state within a state.
Well, people have different views of Hashd al-Shabi. Let me just...
What's your view?
Okay, well, let me explain. Hashd al-Shabi is not just one organization. There are many different elements within Hashd al-Shabi. Some of the elements are the ones that really feel that they needed to defend the country and to fight ISIS, and they did. And we all appreciate the role they played. But there are other elements that have different agendas beyond fighting beyond fighting ISIS. My view is that all of these armed forces must be brought to the control of the legal system and the federal government. So any organization, any armed force outside of law should not be acceptable. That's our view, and this is what we will be pushing for.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Yes, gentleman back and then turn around. Ben, yeah.
Thank you. I'm Benjamin Petrini. I'm a research fellow with the IISS in Washington, D.C. As you have stated, the Kurdish region is an island of relative stability and security amidst many conflicts and war and instability in the region. So what would you say are, looking retrospectively, the ingredients or the actions that you have taken in the last decade or so to provide for that security from an economic, from a governance point of view, and from a security point of view?
I think one thing that we are all very proud of is the acceptance, accepting each other, tolerance and coexistence, accepting different religions and different ethnic groups that live side by side in Kurdistan for decades and centuries. And the moderation of the nature of our people
Usually our people who live in Kurdistan are not extremists. They reject extremist ideologies. I'm not saying that there are none. Of course, I mean, there is always exceptions, but the great majority of the Kurdish people are very moderate. They believe in coexistence. They believe in respecting different religions. And in fact, if you look at Kurdistan, Kurdistan is home to different religions and different ethnic groups. The cooperation of people with very talented, competent, intelligent, and security services that exist in Kurdistan help to provide the kind of security that we enjoy today in Kurdistan.
And on the economic security, provision of economic security.
Unfortunately, economy is not, we are not in total control of our own economy. We don't have our own currency. We don't have our own, let's say, economic or monetary policy. So for that, we have to always depend and rely on the decisions that are made in Baghdad. And sometimes we have been victims of the mistakes that have been made at the federal level. And if we did have total control of our economy, I am sure that the Kurdistan situation from the economic point of view would have been much better than today.
I'm sure that's the point you would make to any candidates for the Iraqi Prime Minister too.
Just to give you an example, what we have in Kurdistan. Now, I'm not saying that we are flawless or we don't have any issues. We have a lot of, we still have a lot to learn and a lot to improve. But what we have built in Kurdistan throughout these years, we've done it with 5% of the Iraqi budget. 5%. So the question is, what happened to the 95% of the budget? Why other parts of Iraq did not improve the way that Kurdistan did? Again, the question is management. So you really have to have a good management to know how to utilize and use your resources wisely.
Thank you. Gentleman there, waiting.
Jan Kuhlmann, I'm a correspondent with the German press agency DPA. You mentioned the poor living conditions of many people in Iraq. And we now have the crisis at the border between Belarus and its neighboring countries. And if reports from the area and also from the local media are true, there are many people from the Kurdistan, from the KRG region, who try to make their way through Belarus to the European Union. What is your explanation for this movement, and how is your government going to tackle it in the short run and in the long run?
Sure. Well, migration is a general phenomenon. It happens everywhere. It happens all the time. It happens in every country. So people want to travel from one country to another for different reasons or in search of different opportunities. I can tell you for sure that nobody has left Kurdistan because of security or economic challenges. And the reason for me to say that is that we are hosting about 1 million IDPs in Iraq, from Iraq in Kurdistan region. All of these people have come fleeing insecurity and bad economic conditions. They're coming to Kurdistan because they feel safer and they feel that they're better off in Kurdistan. We also have about 200,000 refugees coming from Syria, and they are also in Kurdistan. We have about 100,000 foreign workers that are working in Kurdistan all the way from Asia, from Africa, the Middle East, Lebanon, Turkey, Iran, other parts of Iraq, that are working in Kurdistan. So there are jobs and there are works. Of course, it's not where we want them to be, like we said, and there's still a lot that we need to provide. I'm not saying that we have perfect conditions. And not having perfect conditions basically gives reason to some people to look at other different opportunities. Some of them believe that living in Europe is much better, and there are many more opportunities available in Europe than in other places, than in Kurdistan. But the main reason, let me just tell you that these people did not leave Kurdistan illegally. They all had visas, and they all left Kurdistan through, official channels, through travel agents and airlines. They travel to different parts of the world, and from there, they went to Belarus and to Minsk. So it's not that these people have been fleeing. They were just going there, hoping that they can reach Europe easily. And also, I must tell you that these people, most of them, have been exploited by travel agents, by human traffickers, by smugglers, and by political merchants. They wanted to use these people for their own purposes to make profit off their travels. And then at the end, they were directed to Poland borders to use them for the political dispute that existed between Belarus and EU. So most of these people that are actually living there have spent thousands of dollars, an average of $10,000 per person. No one poor possesses that much money to become a refugee fleeing and running from poverty. If you look at how much money they spent and gave to these travel agents. So here we're talking about humanitarian crisis, a crime against humanity actually. There are mafia groups, there are groups that are working to use humans for some different purposes. And just to give you an example, there is no record whatsoever that anyone has died from starvation in Kurdistan. No one. Maybe some are poor, maybe some do not have perfect living conditions. Of course, we are still struggling, we are still having problems, and we admit that. We know that we need to improve our situation in every aspect. But these people have gone there, spent a lot of money, and there is one more reason I must tell you, that if you look at where they come from Kurdistan, and they are not only from the Kurds, there is a lot of spot on the Kurdish immigrants. But there are others. There are people from Iraq, other parts of Iraq, people from Syria, people from Afghanistan, people from Africa. So there are people from everywhere. And the focus on the Kurds is quite unusual. Why always talking about the Kurds? And the ones that have left Kurdistan are the ones that have left in the conflict zones, where PKK actually exists. And PKK is also giving many of these people instructions and giving them motivations to go there and to speak against the image of the KRG. That's in their interest. So there's a lot of political opposition that's also exploiting these opportunities as well.
And you've spoken, Prime Minister, about the need for your commitment to greater collaboration, cooperation with European countries on this. What do you think what form might that take? Who's your real target here? Is it people smugglers? Do you see this as essentially a criminal problem?
We are working, of course. I mean, yesterday I was just speaking with the Prime Minister of Poland, and before that with the Minister of State of Germany. We are working with Baghdad as well. We are offering every support that we can. In fact, I looked at it from two different perspectives. One is humanitarian crisis. So I'm concerned about all those children who have no guilt. They're absolutely innocent, and they're caught up. They're caught up in cold, and some of them are frozen to death. So I'm asking to all of the European countries to help provide assistance to these people who are in much need. Every day we hear that somebody is dying from cold weather because they're starving to death. In fact, they went for better lives, but unfortunately, they're dying because they don't have enough to eat, or because they don't have enough to cover themselves. So we are seeking all of our friends to extend immediate aid, helping ICRC to reach these people, and also to collectively work to go after this network of human traffickers. There are lots of travel agents and human traffickers that are playing with the lives of people. They should never be weaponized for political purposes. Human life should not be weaponized for political purposes. Unfortunately, this is happening. So we are asking all of our friends in Europe and in the region to help us to actually tackle this issue and deny these smugglers and criminals to play with people's lives.
Thank you, Professor. Go on. Yes, the lady here and the gentleman down.
I am Sam Al-Kibbi, Head of Emirates Policy Center from Abu Dhabi. Your Excellency, you are located between two difficult neighbors, Iran and Turkey. How can you navigate between these two hegemons and counter their influence on your country?
Well, we're surviving. We want to have normal, good relations with all of our neighbors. With Iran and with Turkey, actually, we have developed normal relations. We believe in the policy of not interfering in each other's affairs and having good relations on the basis of mutual respect. And this is the way that we have been dealing with both countries. In fact, we have great economic relations with Turkey as well, and with Iran. Also, we are trying to normalize relations, but as you know, Iran has more leverages and ways to influence because of the relationship with the federal government. But with Turkey, also, there are some challenges because of PKK and some of the conflicts that are happening in our northern borders. So we are trying to manage the situation. It's not been easy. It's not easy whatsoever. But we are trying to do our best to ease tension, to calm the situation, and to be a constructive player rather than being a part of the problem that exists between these forces or other forces that are actors in the area.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Stephen Kale, I'm a reporter with the Wall Street Journal. I actually lived in Kurdistan in 2016 and 17, and I left just a few months before the independence referendum. And you made some references to Kurdistan's situation in Iraq, operating off of not all of the revenue. Its physical security is circumscribed to some extent by Baghdad and federal Iraq. And so I wonder, in the current period, in the current climate, 4 years after the referendum sparked the conflict, where do you see the independence project? Where do you see the future of Kurdistan autonomy and sovereignty? Given the years of insecurity with ISIS, largely, the Iraqi security forces collapsed and Kurdistan had to defend its own borders in a crisis. And with the regional situations, is that dream going to come back? Is it on hold for a few years? How do you see that in general?
Yes. As you know, we recently had elections. Elections are the reflection of people's views of what the future of the country should be and who should run the country. We want the results of the elections to be respected by all. And we certainly would like to negotiate on implementation of the Constitution as our main concern for the formation of the future for the next government. So it's not the individuals that become, let's say, the focus, but the agendas that need to be the focus of how the future government should be formed. And that is, we insist on the full implementation of the Constitution. If we do that, I do believe that there is a lot that we can all achieve. Iraq is made up of different communities and different components. You have to be fair to all of them and give rights to all of them. And what's been stipulated in the Constitution needs to be actually implemented on the ground. We can't have theoretical solutions and hoping for some good outcome. That's not going to happen. And whenever we challenge the Constitution or run away from the responsibilities and the obligations that everybody has, then this is not going to produce any good results. So I think if we all come to some sort of understanding that we need to work together, to accept each other. And that's, I think, the key word. We need to accept each other the way we are, not the way that somebody wants us to be. That's what we are. We are different, but we need to work together. We need to live together. For that, we need to build trust. We need to trust each other rather than looking at every action in a, let's say, suspicious way and then create a reaction. That's been the case. Anybody coming up with an idea, the other side, because of what's happening on the ground, they think that, okay, you do this, then I have to take a different position. So these defensive positions is because of the lack of trust. So, we know that Iraq is made up of different communities, different religious groups, but there are three main components, Shia Arabs, Sunni Arabs, and the Kurds. And of course we have Christians, we have Turkmens. But they have to accept to live together. And none of them should be dominant and be a threat or a potential threat to any of the community in the future. I think that set of mind is still ruling in the country. Now, with this current government, of course, things are different. We are not talking about a prime minister. We have a good prime minister. We have good individuals. But what I'm talking about is a system that cannot allow the abuse of power by anyone. What if tomorrow we don't have a good prime minister? What if tomorrow we have somebody that wants to resort to violence and the use of force to sort out political problems, as they happen, they did in the past? There must be a system that doesn't allow them to happen. So what we are trying to achieve is to reach to that point where there is a mechanism that doesn't allow anyone to operate outside of law or the Constitution. So the key is really the implementation of the Constitution and building trust amongst the communities.
And Barzani, do you have an idea of what those trust-building steps might be?
Yes. I think it's easy if we just forget all the previous thoughts. Come on a round table with a fresh thought. Let's free ourselves from the preoccupied ideas and the pre-made decisions. If you come up around the round table with fresh ideas, hoping that we can achieve a comprehensive understanding of what the situation should be for all of us, I think there is a huge potential for that. We have more in common than we have differences. Right now, we are caught up with the differences and forgot about the common points that we have and share with each other. If we focus on what we have in common and build on that, there is a possibility. And that needs to happen with the support of all of our friends. Unfortunately, sometimes there are external factors that prevent us from even reaching such a common understanding.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, we've got a few more. Gentlemen, then I'll work my way back to Sir Tom.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for your candid and frank intervention. My name is General Davide Modi, a NATO Strategic Direction South Hub Director. You mentioned about common challenges and the need for cooperation. You mentioned climate change, and I know that you also become more efficient to use more resources of gas and oil. Do you really have a kind of plan for this diversification, moving the world into the green economy? Thank you for that.
Absolutely. When I started this cabinet, we realized that the natural resources, especially gas and oil, will come to an end at some point. When we will know later on, but that's not something that we can always rely on. And for that, I decided to diversify our economy, investing more in agriculture, developing our industry, looking at tourism, and look at education and health sector. So looking really at a
number of other sectors that can produce more revenues for all of us. And in fact, we've been very successful despite all the challenges and all the tough times that we have gone through. But we have managed to increase our agricultural production. Unfortunately, because of the drought, we have been very lucky. But I'll just give you an example. We have built at least 12 government-sponsored silos, 3 main food projects, which is important for the food security. Our farmers could produce 900,000 tons of wheat. Let's say, food structure or food centers that we have built, or some of these projects that we've started, in Erbil alone, we can buy back about 1,200,000 tons of wheat from our farmers, far beyond what they produce. That is encouraging our farmers to produce more, rather than thinking about what to do with their products, which has been the case until now. We've even had that problem with the federal government, when our farmers were producing, but they couldn't sell. So it became a problem. Now we wanted to take care of that concern of the farmers, buying back everything they produce as government, and then process it and take it back to the market, which we have been extremely successful in that regard. And I think within very few years, we will be self-sufficient in terms of providing food security for our region. But that's not my goal. My goal is that Kurdistan becomes a food basket for Iraq and beyond as well.
I think we've got time for just 2 more quick questions, which I'll take together. So, the microphone to the gentleman here and the gentleman behind with his hand up. Yeah, take 2 questions together. Thank you. You first,
Yes, thank you. Joseph Bahoud from the American University in Beirut. Mr. Prime Minister, Syria is now entering into a new phase, and one of the remaining files there is what's happening in the northeast, in Rojava, as some may call it. What are your views about these dynamics there? I mean, the Kurdish component there is in talks with the regime sometimes, but also there is, I mean, of course, the Turkish constraint and the Russian game and etc. Are you involved in all this, and what are the views of Iraq's KRG on this evolution? Thank you.
Well, Rojava is not the name. Rojava means west. It means west part of Kurdistan, because we believe that there is a part of Kurdistan in Syria. So Rojava actually refers to west. And there is a large Kurdish community that lives there. Now we have a different view on how that area is administered. We, at the beginning, were hoping that all of the Kurds that live in Syria come together and have some sort of elections and have a legitimate representation. And then they can decide for themselves whether they want to negotiate with the regime in Damascus, or whether they want to engage with the world in a different way. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And that's because the current administration that is ruling in that area is very closely affiliated with PKK. And PKK is the reason that doesn't allow the Kurdish dialogue. And that's a big problem. So what we are trying, our involvement has been to encourage Kurds to talk to each other and to have a Kurdish view of what they want to have. And just to give you some background, do you know that the Kurds in Syria didn't have an identity? And I remember before all of this Arab Spring started, in one of our visits in Damascus, we asked one of their officials, why don't they have Syrian identity, citizenship? So because we don't want them to forget their roots, they have to go back to where they came from, meaning that they don't belong here. So only when they needed them for military service, they would give them citizenship and then take it away from them, unless they had to change their identity. and forget about being Kurds, and that's when they could possess some sort of identity or identification, in fact. So in this case, it's really up to the Kurds in Syria, but not the current administration, because we don't think that they represent all of the Kurds. There are many, and in my belief, is the majority of the Kurds that do not support the current system in the Kurdish areas in Syria. So our idea, if we can play any role, is to bring them together, to have a united Kurdish voice, and then they can decide about their fate and how they want to deal with either Damascus or the friends that are there.
Thank you. We'll take one more question. Gentleman there.
Thank you. My name is Musharraf Zaidi. I'm from Pakistan. I work for a think tank called the Bad Lab. I had a question that's a little more generic, but given your experience, I think this is a fascinating position for you in particular, given your own journey and the Kurdish region's journey, which is about sort of federalism writ large. If we consider federalism to have kind of three broad components, the first being political and administrative, which is about control over the country and representation in the institutions of the country, i.e. Iraq. And the second being fiscal, which is about how much money you get from the whole system in order to serve your people within your region. And the third being kind of a more generic sort of identity-based metric, which is that do Kurds, the example of Syria is an interesting one, do you get to speak your language and live your culture and live your best life, so to speak? So on those three metrics, I just want you to maybe rank or rate how well you think Iraq is doing, not Kurdistan, but Iraq is doing with respect to you and your people. And what are the factors within these three? What is the one that if it goes wrong or keeps going wrong, maybe it isn't going so well, is going to be the thing that breaks Iraqi federalism?
Well, this is a broad question, actually. We can't say Iraq, because Iraq has gone through phases. There have been different regimes, different people, different prime ministers, different leaders who've had different views on how to deal with Kurdistan. So I cannot generalize and say that this is the Iraqi view. At a certain point, that was the vision and the view of that certain individual. At the moment, we have good relations with Baghdad, but that doesn't mean that it's perfect. We still have problems. Just in the last 2 years that I'm in this cabinet, about $3 billion, $100 million of our budget hasn't been paid by Baghdad. And whenever we talk with Baghdad, to the Prime Minister, it's not the Prime Minister that's making that decision. It's the political system that is adding pressure on the Minister of Finance and also on the Prime Minister, not allowing that to happen. And all of that goes back to the firm belief of how many of us truly believe in federalism. In Kurdistan, we take it seriously. But I don't think that that mentality is shared with everybody in Baghdad. Now, some of them do, but not everyone. And unfortunately, at certain points, at certain times, the ones who are against federalism have more authority and power in Baghdad. And these are the ones that are not allowing this natural relationship between Baghdad and Erbil to improve and reach higher levels. So that's really, I can't just give you a straight answer, because depending on what time you're referring to and which individual you're referring to, and then I could be more specific. But in general, we have gone through phases and ups and downs through time. But at the moment, I think our relations are okay, but we need to improve them, and we need, like I said, not only depend and rely on who becomes a prime minister. We need to have a system. That system must guarantee the relationship and the rights of not only our people, but the rest of Iraqi people.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We are sadly going to have to finish there, but thank you very much for coming, speaking to us so frankly, and for sharing your vision of Kurdistan, Iraq, and the region. Thank you.